We just played that clip of Chuck Grassley with his constituents and a room of largely older white people from Iowa outraged at the idea that the Trump administration is just disappearing Kilmar Abrego Garcia and other immigrants into this El Salvador gulag, where I finally got the courage to really do a deep dive last night into the conditions. And I'm having a hard time sleeping thinking about it. It looks like an extermination camp. The men there being forced to be completely silent, packed in like sardines, in boxers with their heads shaved. Obviously, this evokes much of what we were seeing of Palestinians coming out of Israeli prisoners. I want to be clear that this is a global movement by Western fascists here, U.S. aligned fascists, where these men are in these like steel bunk beds on top of one another where they sleep. There is they don't get to go outside. They don't have pillows or blankets. They don't get to speak or interact with one another. The lights are on every single hour of the day, blaring light. They don't get to speak to anyone from the outside like a lawyer or a family member. And then you see, and this is unconfirmed, but I'm just putting that out there, satellite image data that then went away of dark pools of what could be blood in around the facility. Okay, so this is where we're at this moment. This is where the administration just sent people from U.S. soil without due process in violation of a court order. And I say all of that to underscore just the level of seriousness of what we're experiencing. And the judiciary...
We should stress too that the people who are there, the vast majority, have not been given any due process, whether they're they were put there by El Salvador because they live in El Salvador, or whether they were put there by the Trump administration and shipped there, trafficked there. The majority of these people, their crime is having tattoos. Seriously.
Exactly.
That appears to be the crime here.
Not to double interrupt, but I think that's why, not to contradict you, Emma, but, this is a concentration camp. This is a place where people who have been accused of sometimes no crime have been sent for being like inconvenient to the narratives of politicians who run both El Salvador and the United States of America. We don't know who is in these camps at this point, and there's no mechanism to get them out of these camps. I've seen the satellite photos that you're saying, and you can't really determine what that is based on those photos. But what we can determine is that there does not seem to be a mechanism for these people to ever be released or to have due process given post being incarcerated, and that makes this a concentration camp on its way to being a death camp. And it's just another death camp that the United States of America is at least partially funding with taxpayer money at this point. So we have Gaza, we have our many black sites around the world that we don't even know about, and apparently also in Virginia. But yeah, and this is just another one of those.
I mean, it's important to point that out. And that's the part of the selling point is that the government of El Salvador says, well, Bukele, I have sole discretion to put somebody in, and I have sole discretion to take somebody out. So, and if people go in there, they never come out. Well, what does that mean? What does that mean?
And how could that ever develop? Like, there's certain type of folks that say, like, well, he's actually sort of popular in El Salvador. And, like, so is Fujimori in Peru for a little bit. Like, authoritarian crackdowns, especially when it was preceded by violence, partially by gangs that Bukele has done deals with to keep, like, say, MS-13 people from being extradited to the United States. There can be a brief respite because the people are so beaten down by conditions, very often informed by our foreign policy, like for the last few decades. But this can't go anywhere positive.
No, I don't care about his approval rating domestically. I mean, Netanyahu, and his actions in Gaza, it's over 70% approval rating for the entire ethnic cleansing and genocide of the Gaza Strip. There's a certain level where at some point, has to be international pressure to end these kinds of practices. And this is where I just want to bring it back to the clip we're going to play here, is all of this horror that we're describing is the courts can say, the Supreme Court said 9-0 that they have to facilitate Kilmar Abrego Garcia's return. They're not doing it. Now we're going to go through this other process. Boasberg says that he's beginning contempt proceedings for the shipping of the Venezuelan migrants and the fact that the administration defied that order. But there's no enforcement mechanism here, right, for the judiciary, which is why the legislative branch should be doing its job. But the Republicans are entirely captured by this cult of personality. There should be impeachment proceedings starting yesterday in the House and the Senate, but they're controlled by Republicans. And so that's not going to happen, even though this is so flagrant. And here is Lisa Murkowski, who I think might be flirting with the idea of becoming an independent or caucusing with the Democrats, because she's up in 2026. And I think it's Mary Peltola, who's their one member of Congress, if I'm not mistaken, in Alaska, their congresswoman at large, who possibly is considering primarying Murkowski. That's just my speculation. So I wonder if she's considering caucusing with the Democrats. This is what she described as to what the situation is from the perspective of a Republican and why she's afraid to speak out.
What do you have to say to people who are afraid or who represent people who are afraid? We are all afraid. Okay? It's quite a statement. But we are, we're in a time and a place where I don't know, I certainly have not been here before. And I'll tell you, I'm oftentimes very anxious myself about using my voice, because retaliation is real, and that's not right. But that's what you've asked me to do. And so I'm going to use my voice to the best of my ability. And sometimes it will be viewed in a way that, well, that's pretty confrontational. And other times it's going to be using my mother's charm that I learned as a young girl, and in direct communication with those that I've made relationships with, and am able to affect some change that way. But I've got to figure out how I can do my best to help the many who are so anxious and are so afraid.
Okay. You are one of 100 senators. You have immense power. Putting that aside for a second, though, the Hang Mike Pence crowd's still out there. And that's...
Pardoned.
They got pardoned. And that's the calls that, when you hear about some of the calls that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez gets, or Ilhan Omar, or Rashida Tlaib, people on the left, or even Nancy Pelosi, just by being a leader of the Democrats, I wonder what kind of calls these Republicans are getting. This doesn't excuse any of this cowardice. If you're not able to stand up to this is what your duty is. You're well compensated for that. If you're a United States senator, you're most likely a very rich person, with very few exceptions. You've got to stick your neck out. And if you can't do that, you resign and make space for somebody who can do that. Because I just don't even understand. She's not being specific about the retaliation. Where is it coming from? What does it mean to use your voice? Like, we only have the ability to use our voice as people who are not part of the government. Use your power.
You have a veto.
Yeah. So I'm both like, she's probably the only Republican senator that we can hope for, like, maybe, even Susan Collins is like weaker than this woman at this point, right? So they're both so pathetic, but it's also just like, I wish that they could be specific about what the threats are that they're experiencing, because it's clearly not just made up. I think the Republicans are getting death threats from MAGA people.
I mean, aren't they always getting threats though? I know we had that, was it Tom Tillis playing his voicemail that was full of threats? But I would imagine that if you're a politician in America, you're like always getting threats. Like this just seems like one of those situations where they're also afraid of political retribution because Trump still has the power to make you lose your seat as opposed to just like lose your life. And a lot of people, like, they rely on their access to power to enrich themselves in a way that, like, you know, they still feel like, if not ingratiating yourself to earning the ire of Trump is a good way to end up not just out of power, but, you know, blacklisted from all the Republican talking circles and things like that.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we just saw another U.S. senator just yesterday go to El Salvador to try to attempt to see how Abrego Garcia is doing, without a doubt putting himself in danger because who knows what the Bukele's government would do. And on top of that, if they did something, would his own government do anything for him? Absolutely not. Trump wouldn't do anything. So like the idea that you won't speak up when there are other people who are meeting the moment is, I mean, come on, you gotta.
It's pathetic. Yeah. I'm trying to be generous to be constructive, but then I get mad again when I think about it. Also, I just want to be clear. Mary Peltola did lose her seat in 2024 at the end. Well, still, obviously, to a Republican, still has the opportunity, I think, to primary or to challenge Murkowski down the line. But yeah, it's I don't know where we can expect courage from either, because even the Democrats aren't fully behind standing up to this fascist administration.
I think everyone just seems like they're trying to pinch their nose and get through it. I think Republicans are afraid, at least the political class. I feel like Republicans are afraid of speaking out against Trump because that means that in the short term, they might lose their seat to like a more MAGA adjacent, like primary challenger, maybe in 2028, maybe in 2026, 2028. I feel like Democrats feel like they can rely on Trump to make everyone so actively miserable that they just come running and begging for whatever like empty suit they can fill with a white guy who's vaguely tall and has nice hair. And so like I feel like our political class has just kind of like abandoned the people to, you know, engage in just like waiting out the clock because of how like chaotic and disruptive Trump is.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's right. And hoping that they don't come for you, which is probably not a good thing to do under a fascist administration, if history serves.
Because also, I think there are definitely Republican politicians who are like calling Trump up in a panic when he talks about cutting aid to their state, or when like he talks about soybean tariffs on China or something like, or China's soybean tariffs on us. Like there are people, like Republican politicians, who are definitely calling him up panic, going like, we're going to lose the entire state of Louisiana to the Democrats if you do that. Like,
you mean the Panicans?
Yeah, the panicking, exactly. Like, because now they have to like govern. Republican legislators, politicians, conservatives all over the world no longer have the benefit of like an idealized Trump running from like the shadows of Mar-a-Lago, talking about how much of a victim he is and how they're coming for you after they're done with him. They have to run in the context of how Trump actually is, which people seemingly forgot, even though it was only 5 years ago. And that's bad for them. That's like seeing how Trump actually is, getting reminded of how Trump actually is bad for the Republican brand. It's bad for local Republican politicians. The ones who are in deep red districts are winning by a fraction of what they did last time. The ones in purple districts are like, you know, possibly going to lose. Like Trump is bad for them, and they just have to find some way to like thread the needle of getting on his bad side, and then also like him causing them to lose.
It's one thing that like kind of convinces people that being in power is bad. Like if the Democrats lose this time, they'll come back even more powerful next time. But what they're picking up on is like Brandon said, these Republicans in different states, they can't just blame Joe Biden on everything. Yeah. Now, because there's actually daddy's in the authoritarian chair.
Republicans are in an uncomfortable position too, because they also understand that when it's an off-year election and Trump's not at the top of the ticket, they are in a much worse situation, even in the best of circumstances, when this administration isn't doing what it's doing. But
do some fun.
We have to get to this clip Russ number 2 put together, but I want to read some IMs before we do that. longtime first time said the most recent aerial imagery of the data dated 3/10/25 in Google Earth with the apparent bloodstains shows that it has been covered with a layer of dirt. They covered gravel with a patch of dirt. Okay. Well, I don't know if that's true.
What I'm trying to point out, though, is like, I don't know about those satellite images or whatever, but the logic is clear. When you just mass detain people without sort of any hope of rehabilitating them for returning them into society, and just keep stacking them in, and it becomes a bigger part of the budget, which it is 3% already with El Salvador. The math points to kill these people eventually when it comes to these sorts of regimes. That's just what that's what's going to happen. I feel that's why I brought up the polling earlier. Like, this might look good to media that says like, oh, look at Bukele got the gangs under control, the gangs that he previously had done backroom deals with. It's not going to end well. It's going to be death camps if it isn't already.
Also, I just want to caution people from making up their mind about like what they saw in those images, if only because if it turns out to be anything other than like a pile of bodies, then they get to pretend like the concentration camp they're running is not going to inevitably be a death camp by nature of what Matt's saying, which is just like the practical considerations of packing tens of thousands of people into a like tiny concrete box with no desire or mechanism or intention of ever letting them out for any reason, and they have not been given any due process or even tried with crimes in some cases. Like hinging it on the presence of a pile of bodies is really, really irrelevant for what the place actually is.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.